Hello, I'm Ren, and today we're going to be doing some UMG stuff. So basically, we're going to create a UMG button, we're going to create a UMG note, and that means we're going to import an image for the note, and we're also going to import some font to use for the note. And we're going to draw the UMG to the screen. I've got a little note down there, how to composite UMG widgets. So what we'll do is we'll actually create that UMG button, and I'll show you how to add that to the screen, but also like composite widgets within widgets. You'll understand what I mean when we get into it. So I've created this basic level here. We've got a little character that has some basic movement input. So we've got this little character here that we can move around with, and what we'll do is we'll show you how to create UMG that pops up when you interact with something. So we'll have a note that sits sort of in the center over here, just at the center of this edge, and we basically need to import some assets. So the first thing I'll do is import my new font that I've downloaded. It's a TTF. True type font, and then we'll import an image as well to use with our user interface. So now that these are imported, I'm just going to double click on this one that I want to be used for the UI. What I'll do is make sure it's got no bitmaps. Its texture group here in the drop down, I'm going to set that to UI because I know I'm going to be using it with UI, and just save that and close it. And then we've got this font that we can use within a piece of UMG. So I've got a folder here called UMG Basic. So let's get started. You right click and you go to the bottom to user interface, and then you click on widget blueprint. Once we've clicked on that, we get this little heart shape with some bars underneath it, and that's the icon inside the content browser for a UMG widget. So I'm just going to call this button for now, and inside here I'm going to create my button. So this is what the UMG browser looks like when you double click and open the asset. At the bottom you've got some animation timeline stuff, and we'll go over that in another video, so I'll close that down. On the left hand side, the important part is this palette. So this palette is where you drag things in, so you can just start dragging these in and you'll see them popping up. And on the right hand side, for each of those individual ones, you'll get different options under this details panel. So on the right hand side you've got all these different options what you can do with these things. So with a button, for example, which is the element I've got selected here, at the bottom you'll see it's got on clicked, on pressed, on released, and so on. So that's where you kind of find the events, and that's where you also find like the details. So for this border 20 that I've dragged in, so I dragged a border in from the palette. I've got all my options for content color and opacity, or brush color. So brush color is going to change the color of the actual image there. And then if I was to drag some text inside that, and then select that border from the hierarchy on the bottom left, so that's where all your objects show up in a hierarchy in terms of the canvas is the parent, then there's a border which is a child of that. The button and the image are also children of that canvas, but you'll see that the text that I dragged onto that border is a child of that border. So what that means in the border is content, color, and opacity is white, so I could change that to pink, blue, and that changes the content on the inside of it. So that's just an interesting point. And all these settings that you can change all of these settings inside the graph. And just to quickly demonstrate that, what I could do is make this text that's a child of that border, make that text a variable, call it text block underscore basic text, and then if I click on my graph now, this is where I can code all kinds of events and actions, and so I'll just delete these for now, but what you can do is drag that text block in, and actually maybe on begin play, or event construct in this case, when the widget gets constructed and drawn to the screen, that text block basic text I could type set after dragging off of its return value, and I can go down to the bottom and I can set all sorts of things. So one of the main ones you're going to do is set text. So I could set the text here to equal blah, and I could also maybe set the color. So set color and opacity. Anyway, so that's just a couple of things about putting things into your UMG widget, and there's all sorts of things that you can put in here, and because this is only a basic video we won't go over them, but you can see them inside panel. You've got vertical boxes, horizontal boxes, and these are just things that control how each of those common components are visualized and controlled in terms of their positioning and their anchoring. But right now what we're going to do is on the top right, just make this custom, and this button is going to be a certain size. So you'll see now when I click custom I've got width and height. So I'm going to set this to 300 by 200, and this is going to be the size of my button. So if I drag a button onto there now, you'll see that there's this white thing with a bunch of like arrows coming off of it. If I drag one of those, you'll see these percentage markers pop up, and these are what are called your anchors. So if I were to pull these to each corner, what this means is this button that's on the inside is now anchored to all four corners. And if these four corners were to grow in size, let's say only in the horizontal axis, what would happen is this would stretch like this with those corners. So I might be able to actually show that just by dragging that width pin. So you see how it's anchored to the four corners and it's growing with the changes that are made to those four corners, and if I change the height now, it'll also grow with those. So what we want to do is make sure that this button for now is actually filling those four corners, and if I just drag, you'll see that it goes over those edges. So what you need to do is use the values on the right hand side of the button details, and you'll see how the offsets are negative 112 and negative on all of them because they're actually passing those anchor points. And if I pull them in, you'll see that some of them have become positive now. If I set those all to 0, it basically means that there's no offset from the corners, meaning that it actually like sizes itself equal to those corners and will always be the size of that area. So if I set this back to 300 by 200, and then I'm going to drag text onto that and just call the text button. And now to make an event happen when I click this, if I click on the button in the hierarchy or inside the designer, go to the bottom and press the add button to on clicked, in the event graph it tells me, it gives me this option here, this event option, and I can start doing things based off that. So what I'll actually do is this button, I'll make it into a variable, or the text rather for the button, I'll turn into a variable and call it text block button. Now because it's a variable I can see it on the left hand side, and then I could set the text of this instead. So if I set the text for that, and I'll set that to blur as soon as you actually I'll set it to pressed as soon as you press it, and that'll just show us that we're actually pressing that button. So based on our aims, we've created a UMG button. Now we need to actually draw it to the screen, so I'll do the note afterwards. For now we'll actually just draw this to the screen. So there's a couple of places you can do this. You could do it inside your player, you could do it inside a blueprint that exists in the world, or you could do it in blueprints at the top here in the level blueprint, and that's where I'm going to do it. So the level blueprint is specific to the level. So in basic content I've got this level here called test level, and this test level has its own, you'll see at the top there, test level blueprint. So this is the level blueprint for test level, and to create that widget I basically need to type in create widget. Then I can pick it from my list, so I've got button there. So I can now start setting up how this draws to the screen. So there's 4 general things that you'll want to do at this point, and I'll write them down on this in this document here. So there are 4 things. Let's start drawing those out. The first part that we're going to do when we draw a widget to the screen is setting the alignment. And the way alignment works is if this is our button and we consider this as 0 and 1 and 1, so this will be the X and Y. If these are 0 and 1 to these corners basically, and we set our alignment to be 0.5 and 0.5, it would essentially be aligned from here, meaning that when I set a position, which is another point that we set, the position, when I set that position on the screen somewhere, so let's say I draw it here, it draws this box from the center. If we were to pick just 0 and 0, then it wouldn't have drawn it from the center there, or rather it wouldn't draw it like that, it would draw it from the top left, so it would draw it like this. And similarly, if we were to use 1 and 1 in those values, it would draw it from this corner here, so therefore it would draw it like this. So that's kind of how alignment works. So it's how the widget is aligned in terms of when you select a position for it to be on screen. So the next thing is position, and if we consider this as our screen here, this is going to be our screen, and again you've got the Y and the X. So again this is going to be 0 at the top corner, so this will be 0 by 0 on both the X and Y, and this is going to be at the bottom corner here. this is going to be the screen X and the screen Y. And the way that we find that in Unreal is by using viewport size. And for example, if we wanted to place this, the position of this with the alignment of 0.5, 0.5, if we wanted to place this button straight in the center of the screen, we'd have to divide viewport size by 2. And that would give us this position, because we're dividing all of this size, basically the size in this direction and the size in this direction. We're dividing all of that by 2, which gives us the very center. And another thing we could do is we could say, okay, I want it to be drawn here in this bottom left corner for my button. So what we could do is we could change the alignment. So the alignment would be 0 in the X, and then it would be maybe 1 in the Y, which means it's going to draw from the bottom corner. And then we're also going to set the position to the bottom corner. So in the view size, in the position, it's going to be 0 on the X, and the Y is going to be the screen Y, so the viewport size dot Y. And we'll show how to get those nodes later on. So that actually draws it at the full height of the screen, and then it'll draw it upwards like this. And the next thing that we need to do, so there's 4 things. So the next thing we need to do is consider the anchors. And the anchors are similar to how they're done inside the widget itself. So when we're in the designer and we're setting up those anchors on the 4 corners, so we had the designer like this and we set the anchors to the 4 corners like this, the anchors are pretty much the same inside the viewport. So if I wanted this widget to draw down here and always anchor to the bottom left hand corner, you've got some options inside the anchor which are basically minimum X and Y and maximum X and Y. And what that means is it's the minimum of the X and the maximum of the X, and the minimum of the Y and the maximum of the Y. So these 4 points basically. So the way we could dictate this bottom left hand corner, it's always relayed in 0 to 1 on the anchors. So anchors are always 0 to 1. This is always screen based, and alignment is also 0 to 1. So for this anchor to be anchored to the bottom left hand corner, basically the minimum X and Y need to be, so the minimum X is going to be 0 and the maximum X is also going to be 0. So it's always this left hand side of the screen based on this being the X and this being our max and this being our min. This is 0 and this is 1 on this view size here. So if we use that, we know that this is 0. So we'll put minimum and maximum X at 0, and then we also know in that case that the Y is measured from here to here, again from 0 to 1. So if we want it to be the bottom corner, the minimum Y is going to be 1 and the maximum Y is going to be 1. And if we wanted that to anchor, say, to the 4 corners of the screen, so in these 4 corners, the minimums and maximums will be a little bit different again. So if I just copy that, and for it to be anchored to all 4 corners of the screen and therefore grow and shrink when the screen changes size, what we'd essentially need to do is just change these values from a 0 to 1 space again. So the minimum X is going to be 0 and the maximum X is 1, and the minimum Y is 0 again and the maximum Y is 1. So 0 and 1. So therefore you get these 4 corners. You get 0, 0 over here, and you get 1, 1 over here. So you're anchoring essentially from here to here. It's always going to stretch based on any changes that happen across this entire size, across the screen. So that's anchors. And the last point that we have to consider is the size. So what are the X and Y pixels, dimensions of this? So if I jump back to Unreal and go to my button in my designer, I know that I set it up as 300 by 200. So in this example it's going to be 300 by 200. that's pretty much everything for setting up your widget. The last thing that you need to do is actually add to the viewport. You can either add to the viewport or you can add to the player screen. So there's two options that you can do there, and we'll have a look at all these different nodes. So we're going to look at setting the alignment, setting the position, setting the anchors, and then setting the size. So let's do that. So back in the level blueprint, we've right-clicked, created a widget, we've given it the class of the button that we made inside our content browser. When we right-clicked and created a widget, we created this button. And then we edited it and designed it here, and now we're actually going to draw it to the screen. So create button. So we've got those 4 nodes. If we set alignment first, and then we'll set the anchors, then we'll set the position, and then we'll also set the desired size. So those are the 4 things that we need to do, and we can clean this up now. And you'll see you've got all these options. So in the alignment, you've got the X and Y alignment. So for now, I'm going to make this 0.5, 0.5. So that's going to draw it from the center of the widget. And then the anchors, it's going to be anchored to, if I right click and split, I get that minimum, maximum X and Y. So it's going to be anchored to the center of the screen at the bottom. So in the X, it's going to be 0.5 and 0.5. So it's anchored from the very central area of the screen. And on the Y, it's always going to be anchored from the bottom of the screen. So wherever the bottom of the screen is, this is going to follow that. And then this is where position comes into play, right? So if I bring this down here and actually, if I split that struct, I get the X and Y individually. And then what I want to do is for the position, it's going to be half of the size of the screen's X. So if I get view size, and then split this, I can get the X value and divide that by a float of 2. So I get half of the X, so that goes straight into there. And then the position for the Y is going to be the full size of the screen, but I'm also going to give it a bit of padding. So if I actually minus, let's say 50 from this, that gives it 50 pixels padding from the full Y value of the screen. So if we consider this as the full Y value of the screen, and then I give it 50 pixels padding, it's now going to draw it here. So that's what that's going to do. And one thing I've noticed as well is because the alignment is 0.5, 0.5, it's going to draw it from here. So it's actually going to draw it here and then on. So what would actually happen if I just drew it from here, so the Y value, for example, with no padding, and then it draws it center aligned, some of it, all this bottom area, is actually going to be cut off the screen. So what I could do in the alignment is make sure that it's aligned from 1. So the button itself is actually aligned from here and 0.5. So 0.5 and 1. And then when I do this and give it that 50 pixels padding, we're actually going to be drawing it A from the bottom and also 50 pixels upwards. Okay, so the next thing is setting the desired size. So we know again it was 300 by 200. The very last thing we need to do is add it to the viewport. So you drag off the return pin from the create button widget again. So this is the reference to the widget that we're currently creating. And we add that to the viewport. And that's going to happen on event begin play. So if I hit play now, you'll see the button at the bottom there. But because of my controller, I'm actually not able to click it. So what I'm going to do is jump into my basic controller, disable the mouse X and mouse Y, and create a begin play. In order to actually press this button, I'm going to get the player controller and set game and UI, which allows me to hide cursor during capture. No, I don't want to hide the cursor, I want to see the cursor, and I'm always going to lock always on the mouse position, and the in widget to focus doesn't matter for now. What that basically means is I'll be able to see. The other thing I need to do as soon as you click, the mouse actually disappears. So I need to set show mouse cursor to true. So now I'll be able to actually click that button, and then it turns to pressed. So what's happening there is in this button itself, at the when I click on that in the hierarchy or click it in the designer and go to the bottom, you'll see view on clicked. So here's that on clicked event. What's essentially happening is I'm clicking the button, this is firing, and then it's running through this execution path, and then it's setting the text to pressed. So I hit play, press that button, and it changes. So you could do all sorts of events off of that. For example, off of this you could maybe open a new level. You could do all the sorts of functions that are sort of like default inside Unreal. You could call your own functions. So let's say you've got a custom event that you've made, and it's called show the score or something like that, right? You could, after you've done this, type show the score, and now I've called this custom function. So this could be in a different class maybe, and then this could do something else. So this is just going to print hello when I press that button now. Hello. Every time I do that, it's going to call that function. So it's going to show the score every single time. So you could do different things off of a button. You could change the menu, you could change the level, you could maybe customize your character, and all sorts of things. So anyway, so that's the basic button. So the next thing that I want to do is actually get rid of this for now, and we'll show you how to do the note. So back inside UMG Basic, I'm actually going to use this image and use this text in a new widget blueprint. So user interface, make a widget blueprint, and this is going to be my full screen note. So in this full screen note, I'm just going to leave it to fill the screen. So basically this is going to draw to all four corners like we were talking about earlier, but it's also going to draw something on the center, and it's going to have some text on top of that. So the first thing I want to do is have an image, and the image for this, well, we'll anchor it first. So it's going to anchor from the center of the screen. So wherever the center of the screen is, it's always going to be from there. Maybe we could size it ourselves, so we'll be 600 by 300 for now. Okay, and we'll just keep tweaking this until we're sort of happy. So I'll draw it like this for now. And then on top of here I want my own text. So if I drag some text onto this image, it's actually just going to drag it straight onto the canvas panel, but because it's below it in the hierarchy, it appears in front. And now if I move the ordering of these objects in the hierarchy on the left, you'll see that the text box now hidden by the image because the image is on top essentially. So I'll just move that back around. I'm going to change the size of this text to maybe 80. Now I'm going to need to change this and open it up. So the next thing I want to do is actually change the font. So in the details panel again, in the font, I can select that parchment font that I had. So there's that. It still looks pretty small, so I'm going to keep changing that size. I'm going to drag it over and actually set the size like this. So this has just got the words text block in it at the moment. So I'll call this note, and then inside note we're going to have, I'll leave this one actually as sort of like the title of the note. Now I just want to change the color, because I don't think it reflects like a parchment color. So if I click on that color and opacity under appearance, and just change it to maybe like sort of like a dark ink, maybe slightly brown as well. So that's the title for the note. And if I Control C, click on the canvas panel, Control V, and it'll paste a new one of those. And I want to make sure all of these are anchored in the same way. So I need to set that up independently. So if I click that to the center now, it's just moved it for me. So these are all going to be anchored from the center. I'm going to change the size of this one. I'm going to give it some text. So that's going to be my text for now, right? And then basically we want to draw this to the screen again. And one of the other things that I want to show you based on the original aims was how to composite UMG widgets. So what we'll do is we'll actually composite our other button into here, So user created, we've got this button, and we can just drag it in and then just size it how we want. So this button is now part of this other widget, right? And you can see that from the bottom left. So user created in the palettes options on the left hand side, you'll find the ones that you've made yourself, and you can drag that button into the canvas, and you can parent it to whatever you want it to parent it to. You can set the size of it however you like as well, and then that button will be able to be clicked as well. So what I actually want this to do, this button here, is I want it to actually remove itself and the note from the screen. So this time on this button, we're actually going to have a variable of the widget that we want to destroy. So we'll just call this new variable widget to destroy. So I've created a new variable on the left hand side by clicking that, and called it widget to destroy. And down in its details, I just need to change the type to actually be I believe it's a user widget. Yeah. And if I make that editable and expose it on spawn, actually I'll just make it editable. And then when I click this object, so on this onClicked event again, widget to destroy is this one, and to remove a widget from the screen, you do remove from parent. So that will now, when I click that button, it'll actually remove that note from the screen. And because it exists in this full screen note, I no longer need to draw the other button to the screen because it's part of this one. So back in our test level blueprint, we won't need all of this stuff. We'll need all of these, and we'll need to change their values. We'll also need this create widget, but now we're going to be creating the full screen note instead. And because it's full screen, we don't need to divide any of these values by 2 or change any of that. So we're just going to draw it. The position, sorry, is going to probably be the screen divided by 2. So this is the position, not the size. So I'll recombine that. Recombine this one, divide the full screen size by 2 and draw it in the center of the screen. Make sure both of these are set to 0.5, 0.5. The anchors are all going to be anchored to the center of the screen, so everything's 0.5 across the board here, but then the size is actually going to be the viewport size, and then it adds it to the viewport, so make sure those are linked up. And now when I hit play, that should draw to the screen. It doesn't have widgets attached to all of these objects because I didn't copy that over properly. So just save all those. There we go. Now when I hit play, that should draw it across the screen. So you'll notice here that it's not actually drawing at the full size of the screen. So one of the reasons that might be is because this remove DPI scale. So if we do that, it moves it up and across. So I want to put that back on, and what I think this needs to do is basically apply DPI scaling to it. So the way you use that DPI scale is you actually divide the size of the screen by the scaling of the DPI, and then that gives you essentially what is a full screen note now. So I can still move around the world and stuff, and then I can press that button, and it's displaying an error because it doesn't know what widget to destroy is. So we actually need to set that up in the graph of the new full screen note. So when this gets constructed, we need to get the user widget of the button and set its settings for the widget to destroy. So in order to set that user widget's widget to destroy, you literally just drag off of it. If you've dragged it in as a composite UMG element into your designer, you can just start accessing the variables of it. So set widget to destroy, and then that's going to be self. So now the button that's in our designer on our note knows the widget to destroy is the parent widget essentially, because this button here on the hierarchy is parented to the full screen note, this actual actor. And when this begins, it tells that child widget which is the widget to destroy, because it's the button. And in the button, when you press it, actually destroys that parent. So that just shows you how you can interact between widgets. What will essentially happen when we press play is we click that button and it removes from the screen. So the last thing I wanted to show you guys just very quickly before the end of the video is creating a new actor which spawns that widget for us, the note on the screen, so we can actually walk into it maybe. It comes up on screen and allows us to then actually interact with it individually. So right, okay, so the next thing we want to do is a note creator, maybe, and all this needs to be is a sphere collision, and we'll just make that a little bit larger. I'm not going to make it hidden in game. It's going to be visible for us so that we can see it for now. And then on begin overlap, essentially, on component begin overlap, what I want to do is ask if the other actor is my new character that I created earlier. And if it is, then we want to draw the full screen note to the screen. So if the level blueprint has this already coded, what I can do is just Control X and cut that from there and put it into our note creator. So now when we interact with that volume, it's going to draw it to the screen, and then we'll click the button and it should destroy it. So all we need to do now is actually drag that note creator in. We can see the volume, so I'm just going to increase the size of that so the volume is a little bit larger. If I press play, I can still see that volume, and I go up to it and the note gets drawn to the screen. I can click that button and remove it, and every time I walk into that, it's going to do it for now. So you could have some conditions that actually maybe destroy this object from the world or change which note is going to be drawn to the screen. So that's some basic sort of like UMG stuff. So we've got creating a UMG button and how those are used, creating a UMG note and using like our own imagery and overlaying our own text and our own fonts. We've also been able to draw the UMG to the screen in various ways through a collider or on event begin play. So those are things that you could use for notes that pop up, or even HUD that just starts when the game starts. And we've looked at how to composite UMG widgets together and how to talk between them. So that's a couple of things that should help you create your own user interface in your games. So thanks very much, guys, and good luck creating your own UMG. Cheers, bye.